Well, hello to my Sunday school and Bible story friends. It is really nice to see you. I am hoping that you're well. I'm hoping that school is going well for you and that you are happy and growing in faith. We are talking about Samson. And we've had a couple of weeks about him. He is sort of a Bible superhero, that God filled him with God's Spirit, and it just made him terribly strong. He could do all sorts of feats of strength, and God is using him to rescue Israel from the Philistines. So the last time we talked, if you remember, Samson had fallen in love with a Philistine girl and had married her, and at the wedding there was trouble. There was trouble between him and his guests that he'd asked them a riddle, and if they solved the riddle, he would give each of them clothes, and if they couldn't solve the riddle, that each of them would give him clothes, and it led to killing, and it led to violence, and Samson stamped home and left his new wife there at her daddy's house. All right, that's where we left. Well, Samson was mad for a while, but finally he calmed down, and he wanted to go get his wife. He wanted them to start their life together. And so he'd been gone months. It took him months to calm down. And so he went back to her daddy's house and he asked to see his wife. And her daddy said, no. And Samson said, well, that's my wife. And the guy said, not anymore. You left. I didn't know what you wanted to do, so I let her marry somebody else. That ship has sailed. But listen, I have another daughter. I think she's even prettier than the first one. Why don't you marry my other daughter? And Samson was so mad. And you know, when Samson's mad, bad stuff happens. So Samson went out and he caught 300 foxes and he tied their tails together, which is something that you must never ever do. And then he put a flaming torch between each of the two foxes, right? Tied a flaming torch and their tails together. Lit them all on fire, not the foxes, the torches, and he set the foxes free running through the fields of the Philistines. And it burned up the vineyards where grapes are grown, it burned up the olive groves, it burned up the standing grain. It was just disastrous. And the Philistines looked around at all this and they said, who did this? And people said, well, Samson did it. Well, why did Samson do that? Well, because his father-in-law gave his wife to somebody else and he was mad. And the Philistines, they went and they took it out on that poor man and on Samson's wife. They killed him. And that made Samson really mad. It made him, he said, now that you've done this to me, I swear I won't stop until I have revenge. And he attacked and killed a bunch of Philistines. And then he went and hid for a while, right? To calm down again, to let things settle down. But the Philistines weren't going to let things settle down. So they got their army together and they marched into Israel. They marched into the land that the tribe of Judah had. And they said, you know, give us Samson. And the soldier and the people of Judah said, we'll go get him. Just don't burn anything. Don't kill anybody. We'll go get him. So 3,000 men went down to talk to Samson. And they said, Samson, look, we got a problem. The Philistines, they want revenge. They want you. They're going to kill us if they don't get you. And Samson said, listen, if I surrender to you, will you promise not to kill me? And the men of Israel said, yeah, we don't want to kill you. Of course we don't want to kill you. We'll just tie you up and we'll give you to them so that they don't kill us. And Samson said, deal. So they tied Samson up with new ropes and they brought him to the Philistines, right? And when the Philistines took possession of him, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson, made him unbelievably strong. And he just broke those ropes like they were nothing, like they were threads. And he looked around and he saw there was a skeleton of a donkey that had died. And he picked up the jawbone of that donkey and he just started wailing on the Philistines. He killed 1,000 Philistines with that donkey's jawbone. It was crazy, right? The rest of them ran away. Right? After that, he was just terribly thirsty, and he said to God, you know, are you just going to let me die here of thirst? And God caused there to be water that sprung up there in the wilderness, and Samson could drink of the water. And Samson was the judge of Israel for 20 years. For 20 years, he called people back to God. He told people what they should do. He kept the Philistines at bay. They were still there. You know, he hasn't driven them out yet. We haven't gotten there yet. But he kept them at bay, kept them back on their heels, you know, so that they couldn't do whatever they wanted in Israel. They couldn't attack Israel anymore for 20 years. So there was another story about him that we should do where he went to a Philistine city called Gaza. I mean, it had to drive the Philistines nuts that Samson wasn't afraid of them at all. He just went in and out of their cities and they couldn't do anything about it. And he went into Gaza one day, and he stayed the night there, and they knew he was there, and they made a big plan that they were going to attack him in the morning, that they were going to get all their soldiers together and get ready. So they locked the city gates, and they were gathering and they were waiting for dawn. But Samson didn't stay all night. He got up at midnight and he went, and the city gates were locked, and he wanted to go home. Well, the Spirit of the Lord came on him again, and he just picked up those gates and he ripped them right off the walls, right up out of the ground, and he put them on his back, and he carried them for 20 miles, and he put them on a hill by his house. And in the morning when the Philistines woke up, they didn't have any gates on their town anymore, and Samson wasn't there. And they found their gates a while later, 20 miles away. He's, again, like a superhero. But, you know, an angry superhero. God can use anyone to do his will. And while you and I work on being good and faithful people, God can use us, and God will use us. And Samson was being used by God to set Israel free. So we'll pick up the story again next time. I am so glad that you are spending this time with me. So glad that together we're remembering these stories. And I hope that you have a good week in school. You take care. Bye-bye.